I do HVAC service calls, so I spend a lot of time driving with tools in the back and work orders in my head. Most of my nights look the same. Finish the last job, call it in, wipe my hands on a rag that never really gets clean, and point the car toward home. That night in January 2020, I was heading north on Highway 61 outside Vicksburg. It wasn't raining, but the air had that damp winter feel where everything looks slightly dull under headlights. The road was mostly empty, just the occasional set of taillights far ahead and a few trucks passing the other direction. I was in my own car, not the company van. I'd had a late call and took my own vehicle because it was closer. My tool bag was in the trunk, my work boots were on the floorboard. I had the heater running low because my windshield was starting to fog at the corners. I wasn't tired in the can't keep my eyes open way. I was tired in the I want my couch way. My mind was already moving through what I'd do when I got home. Shower, wash my clothes, set my alarm. Normal stuff. A few miles outside town, my front tire hit something. It wasn't a pothole. It was a hard, sharp thump, like I'd run over a piece of lumber or a chunk of metal. The steering wheel pulled immediately, and the car started vibrating in a way that made my teeth feel loose. The tire didn't slowly go. It blew fast. The sound inside the cabin wasn't dramatic, just a loud slap, slap, slap as the rubber folded and hit the pavement. The car started drifting toward the shoulder, and I had to countersteer to keep it from sliding. I eased off the gas, put my hazards on, and guided it onto the shoulder as carefully as I could. The shoulder on that stretch wasn't generous. It was narrow, uneven, with a ditch beyond it. I stopped with the car angled slightly away from the lane because I didn't have enough room to straighten out perfectly. The first thing I did was look in my mirrors for headlights. I didn't want to get clipped. After that, I reached for my phone and checked signal out of habit. 1 bar. Then it dropped and came back. Not reliable. I sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel, listening to the cars that weren't there. The road was quiet enough that I could hear my engine idling and the click of my hazards. I've changed plenty of tires. You don't need to be a mechanic to do it if you're careful. Still, doing it on the side of a highway at night is different. You're crouched near moving traffic. You're focused on lug nuts while everything else is unpredictable. I got out, opened the trunk, and pulled the spare tire cover back. The spare was there. The jack was there. Everything I expected to be there was there, which is usually where the story ends. When I crouched to look at the blown tire, I saw it had come apart along the sidewall. It looked like it had been cut, but I couldn't tell under the grime and shredded rubber. I ran my flashlight beam around the area in the lane behind me, trying to spot what I'd hit. I didn't see anything. That didn't mean much. Things bounce. Things get kicked into the ditch. It was dark. I set my flashlight on the ground, aimed toward the lane, positioned the jack, and started working. The gravel shoulder was soft enough that the jack shifted slightly when I cranked it. I had to reset it once, then crank again. A set of headlights appeared behind me. At first, I thought it was a truck passing in the right lane. Then it slowed and pulled onto the shoulder behind my car. That part didn't scare me. Plenty of people stop. Especially on a rural highway, someone will pull over and ask if you're okay. I've done it myself. What I noticed immediately was how close it stopped. It didn't leave a comfortable gap. It parked tight behind me, angled slightly so its headlights poured directly into my rear window and the side mirror, making it hard to see anything past the glare. It was a pickup. I straightened up and looked back. Before the truck was fully settled, 2 doors opened. 2 men got out quickly, not pausing to stretch or look around. They moved with purpose, like they knew exactly what they were walking into. I waited for the normal opening line, "You good? Or need a hand?" They didn't say anything. One of them came up the driver's side toward me. The other walked around the passenger side of my car, staying close to the body like he was checking angles. Neither of them looked at the tire. Neither of them looked at the jack. They were looking at me. I'm not a small guy, but I wasn't holding anything. My hands were empty. I was kneeling next to my front wheel with a flashlight on the ground like I was trying to repair something. I took a step back toward my open driver door. My keys were in the ignition, engine still running. I hadn't thought about that until that moment, and then it became the most important detail in my life. The man on the driver's side said, "You broke down?" His tone didn't match the question. It sounded like he was checking a box. "Blew a tire," I said. He stepped closer, too close for a stranger at night on a shoulder. "We can help you," he said. The other man reached the passenger side and leaned slightly toward the window. He wasn't looking inside like a curious person. He was looking in like he was inventorying the interior. His face stayed mostly out of the beam of my flashlight, but I could see the movement. "I've got it," I said. The driver's side man nodded like he hadn't heard me. He took another step. Something in my head shifted away from, "This is awkward," and into, "This is not help." I didn't have a neat reason. I didn't have proof. I just had two men approaching fast without checking the problem. I got into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. The locks clicked immediately because my car does that when it's put in drive, but I wasn't in drive yet. I still hit the lock button on reflex. I kept the window up. I kept the engine running. The driver's side man stepped right up to the glass. He wasn't smiling. "Roll it down," he said. "No," I said. He looked at my hands on the wheel and then down at the center console like he was watching for me to grab something. "Man, we're trying to help you," he said, and his voice was sharper now. The passenger side man moved toward the rear passenger door and tried the handle. He didn't tug once, like someone checking if it was locked. He pulled hard and then pulled again, like he expected it to open. The sound traveled through the cabin, metal handle snapping back, the door shifting slightly against the frame. My breathing got shallow, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because my chest locked up the way it does when you're holding still and trying to listen to everything at once. The driver's side man tapped the window with his knuckles and motioned downward. "Open the door," he said. I shook my head once. He stared at me and leaned closer to the glass. I could see his mouth moving, and I caught a few words through the window, but it didn't matter. The point was the pressure. The passenger side man tried another handle, this time the rear on the driver's side. I heard him move behind my car. The truck's headlights made his silhouette hard to pick out in the mirror, but I could see movement near my rear door. I looked at the side mirror and saw the pickup's front end angled in a way that made it harder for another car to stop behind them. If someone else wanted to pull over to help me, they'd have to park in the lane or far back. I reached for my phone with my right hand and tried to dial 911 with my left still on the wheel. No signal. I didn't have time to keep trying. The driver's side man said something and pointed down the road, like he wanted me to get out and walk somewhere with him. He made a sweeping gesture toward the front of my car. I didn't answer. He took a step back and looked toward the pickup, then back at me, like he was weighing what to do next. I made my decision in the ugliest, simplest way possible. I put the car in drive and went forward. The rim grinding on pavement is one of the worst sounds I've ever heard. It's not just loud, it's wrong. It shakes the steering wheel and sends vibration through the whole car. The front end lurched like it didn't want to move, but it moved. The driver's side man jumped back and slapped the side of my car with his hand as I passed him. It wasn't hard enough to dent it. It was more like anger. The passenger side man was already moving away from the rear door, quick steps, as if he'd expected me to bolt and wanted to avoid being clipped. I didn't look at them longer than necessary. I kept my eyes on the shoulder and the line of white paint at the edge of the lane. The car pulled hard without the tire. The rim wanted to swerve me out of the lane. I fought it, keeping it straight enough to move forward. The pickup's headlights stayed behind me for a second. Then they shifted. I couldn't tell if they were pulling back onto the road or staying on the shoulder. I wasn't going to slow down to find out. The next half mile felt like a long corridor. The only thing in my head was, lights, get to lights. I knew there was a gas station up ahead because I'd passed it on this route before. It wasn't a big travel plaza, just a small station with a couple pumps and a convenience store. Still, it had lights and cameras and other people sometimes. The rim kept grinding. Sparks flashed in the mirror when the metal hit a low spot. The steering wheel jittered, and my hands started hurting from keeping it straight. I kept my foot steady on the gas, not fast, but not slow enough to get caught on the shoulder if the rim dug in. When the gas station lights came into view, I felt something loosen in my neck. I didn't relax. I just had a direction. When the deputy showed up, the lot got calmer in my head. The deputy took my statement quickly. He asked what the pickup looked like. I told him, dark-colored, older model, no clear markings, 2 men, both wearing dark jackets. I couldn't give a plate. Their headlights had filled my mirrors, and I hadn't been thinking about numbers. The deputy drove down the road a bit and came back. He said he didn't see anything parked nearby. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to hear probably nothing from anyone. The next day, I had the car towed and got the damage assessed. The rim was ruined. The fender liner was torn up from the vibration. The blown tire was shredded enough that it was hard to tell what caused it. A tire shop guy asked if I hit something sharp. Probably, I said. I didn't tell him about the pickup. There are parts of that night that are easy to talk about, like the tire blowing and driving on the rim. The part I don't like revisiting is how quickly those 2 men moved once they stopped. It wasn't the behavior of people offering help. After that, I started keeping a few things in my car that I should have been keeping anyway. A better jack base for soft shoulders, a small reflective triangle kit, a portable charger that doesn't depend on signal. I also started pulling off at exits instead of shoulders if the car can still roll, even if it means damaging something and paying for it later. If the car can move, I move it toward light. I cover multiple states for commercial renovation work, so long drives are part of my routine. I don't mind them. I keep the cruise control steady, listen to talk radio or nothing at all, and make good time. Interstate 80 through Wyoming is familiar to me. Long stretches, wide sky during the day, and at night, just a ribbon of headlights cutting through open land. In April of 2019, I was heading east near Cheyenne after wrapping up a job that ran later than expected. It was fully dark but clear. No snow, no rain, just wind. There's almost always wind on that stretch. Traffic was light, a few semi-spaced far apart, no steady flow of cars. I was doing a little under the speed limit because crosswinds can shove you around if you're not paying attention. Up ahead on the right shoulder, I saw hazard lights. That's common enough. Blown tire, engine trouble. Someone pulled over to make a call. As I got closer, I noticed the van wasn't parallel to the road. It was angled slightly, nose pointed toward the lane instead of straight down the shoulder. Not sideways across traffic, but enough that it looked like it hadn't fully committed to being parked. It was a white cargo van. No visible company logo on the side from what I could see. Just plain white. I checked my mirrors and moved slightly left in my lane to give it space as I passed. As my headlights reached the van, I glanced over. The driver's seat looked occupied, but I couldn't see details. The windshield reflected my lights back at me. I passed it without slowing much. In my rearview mirror, I saw the van's hazards still blinking. Then, a few seconds later, they stopped. Its headlights came on. I watched in the mirror as it rolled forward off the shoulder and merged into the right lane. It didn't use a signal. I told myself it was coincidence. They'd been stopped, saw a break in traffic, and got back on the road. Nothing about that is illegal in a way that matters at night on an open highway. The van settled into the lane behind me at a distance that wasn't close, but wasn't far either. I kept my speed steady. After a minute or two, I checked the mirror again. Same position. I adjusted the cruise control up by a few miles per hour. The van did the same. And that's when I started paying more attention. Drivers pace each other sometimes without realizing it, especially at night. But usually someone drifts. Someone changes lanes. Someone either passes or falls back. I tapped the brakes lightly to disengage cruise and let my speed drop slightly. The van dropped too. I waited a few seconds, then eased back up to my previous speed. The van matched it again. At that point, I changed lanes. There was no one in the left lane. I signaled, moved over, and held that lane. The van signaled and moved over behind me. That wasn't proof of anything, but it wasn't nothing. I let it sit behind me for a while. I didn't want to overreact and start making unpredictable moves. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and watched the distance between us. Every time I adjusted speed by a small amount, the gap remained almost identical. I considered exiting at the next ramp, but the next exit sign was still miles away. And sometimes taking an isolated exit is worse than staying on a lit interstate. Eventually, I saw signs for a rest area ahead. That felt like a controlled choice. Well lit, cameras, bathrooms, vending machines, other travelers. I put on my signal and slowed gradually as I approached the rest area entrance. The van slowed too. I turned into the rest area and pulled into a parking space near the main building under bright overhead lights. I didn't shut my engine off right away. I watched the entrance in my mirror. The van turned in. It didn't hesitate at the fork in the rest area driveway. It came straight toward the parking lot where I was. Instead of choosing a single space, it parked across two, angled slightly, so its front end faced toward my vehicle. The engine stayed running. I waited for a door to open. None did. No dome light came on. No silhouette shifted inside. The windshield was too dark to see through clearly from where I sat. I checked the time. Just after 11 p.m., a semi pulled in on the far side of the lot and parked. Its engine idled loudly. That noise helped. It meant I wasn't alone in the space. I stepped out of my truck and walked toward the building entrance. I kept my pace normal. I didn't want to look like I was fleeing something. As I walked, I glanced sideways at the van. Still running. No movement. Inside the rest area building, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A couple of vending machines flickered. There were two other people in there, a trucker washing his hands and a woman refilling a water bottle. I stood near the front windows and pretended to check my phone while I watched the van. It didn't move. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. The trucker left the bathroom and walked out to his rig. I watched him cross the lot. He didn't look toward the van. After a few more minutes, the van's brake lights came on. It pulled out of the two spaces and drove slowly toward the exit. It didn't circle the lot. It didn't approach my vehicle. It left. I stayed inside for another 10 minutes. I didn't want to step out the moment it was gone and risk meeting it at the ramp. When I finally went back to my truck, I scanned the lot carefully. The semi was still there. The wind had picked up slightly, moving dust across the asphalt. I got in and locked the doors. Instead of getting right back on the interstate from the rest area ramp, I took the frontage road that looped briefly parallel to the highway before reconnecting farther down. It added a few minutes, but it let me re-enter traffic from a different point. When I merged back onto I-80, I watched my mirrors closely. No white van immediately behind me. I drove another 30 miles before stopping again, this time at a larger truck stop with more lighting and constant traffic. The rest of the drive was uneventful. The next morning, in daylight, I walked around my truck before heading to my next job site. I always do that out of habit. Check tires, check for leaks, make sure nothing looks off. When I reached the rear window, I noticed a faint smear near the center of the glass. It looked like a partial handprint, but not a full one. Just a wide smudge that hadn't been there before. I can't prove when it got there. It could have been from loading tools earlier in the day. It could have been something I leaned against. But I don't usually touch the rear window. I wiped it off with a rag and didn't think much more about it until that night when I got back on the road. Since then, when I see a vehicle sitting angled on a shoulder with hazards on, I pay closer attention before I pass it. And if one falls in behind me and holds the same distance for too long, I don't wait to see what it wants. I work in an emergency department just outside Eugene. 12-hour shifts are normal for me, and by the end of them, I'm usually running on habit more than energy. I don't zone out when I drive home, but I also don't feel fully awake. It's more like a narrow, steady focus. In September of 2022, I finished a night shift that had been steady, but not chaotic. No major traumas, a couple of difficult cases that stuck with me, but nothing unusual for that department. I left the hospital a little after 1 a.m. The freeway route home is faster, but I often take the rural back road instead. It's quieter, fewer merging lanes, fewer unpredictable drivers. It cuts through stretches of farmland and then into a lightly wooded area before reaching my neighborhood. There aren't many streetlights on that road, mostly just reflectors and the occasional mailbox catching your headlights. I was about 15 minutes into the drive when I came up behind an SUV. It was dark colored, maybe gray or black. I didn't get a good look at the make. It was doing slightly under the speed limit, which didn't bother me. I'm not in a hurry after shifts like that. I settled in behind it at a reasonable distance. After a minute or two, the SUV tapped its brakes. Not a full stop, just a brief flash of red and a small drop in speed. I eased off the gas and let the distance increase slightly. The road was straight there. No intersections, no animals that I could see in the beam of my headlights. The SUV picked up speed again, then it tapped the brakes a second time. Harder. I pressed my brake pedal to compensate. My tires made a faint sound against the pavement. Nothing dramatic, just enough to register. I increased the following distance again. I've seen distracted drivers do that. Brake check themselves because they're adjusting something or misjudging their speed. I told myself that was probably it. The SUV drifted slightly within its lane and then corrected. A third brake tap came, sharper than the others. This time I was already holding back, so I didn't have to brake as hard. I checked the road ahead carefully. No deer in the ditch. No debris visible. At that point, I decided to pass. There was a broken yellow line section ahead that allowed it. I signaled and moved into the oncoming lane to overtake. As I did, the SUV shifted left slightly within its lane. Not fully crossing the line, but enough that it narrowed the gap. I adjusted my position and continued forward. The SUV accelerated just enough to keep pace with me, preventing a clean pass. I fell back into my lane behind it. Now I was more alert. I waited for the next straight stretch and signaled again. This time, as I moved left, the SUV drifted left more deliberately, crossing the center line just enough that I couldn't safely pass without risking a head-on situation if another car appeared. I dropped back again. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself it could still be an inattentive driver. Someone tired. Someone who didn't realize what they were doing. Then the SUV slowed rapidly. Not a gradual reduction. A decisive slowdown. I pressed my brakes harder than before, bringing my car close to a stop. The SUV came to a full stop in the middle of the lane. No turn signal. No hazard lights. Just stopped. For a second I thought maybe it had stalled. Then the reverse lights came on. Bright white against the dark road. The SUV began backing up. Not slowly. It reversed quickly, straight toward me. There was no mistaking it as an accident. The movement was direct and fast. I had maybe a second to decide. The road shoulder on my right was narrow gravel. On the left was the opposite lane and then a shallow ditch beyond that. I steered right and pressed the gas. My tires hit the gravel shoulder and started to slide slightly. Small rocks hit the underside of my car. The steering wheel felt loose in my hands as the traction changed. The SUV's rear bumper came within what felt like a few feet of my front end before it stopped reversing. It paused for half a second. Then it shifted forward again. The reverse lights went off. The brake lights flashed once. Then it accelerated forward down the road as if nothing had happened. No hazard lights. No erratic swerving. Just steady driving. I stayed on the gravel shoulder for another few seconds, letting it put distance between us. When I eased back onto the pavement, my hands were still steady, but my arms felt tense. I checked my mirrors repeatedly, expecting it to slow again or turn around. It didn't. It continued ahead, taillights shrinking until they disappeared over a slight rise. I drove another mile before pulling over in a wider turnout area. I needed a moment to assess whether my car was damaged. I stepped out and checked the front bumper with my phone's flashlight. No visible impact. The underside had gravel dust on it, but nothing looked torn or leaking. I got back in and drove to a gas station closer to town that I knew stayed open late. Under the canopy lights, I felt more stable. The presence of other cars, even just two, made the road feel less empty. I went inside and bought a bottle of water I didn't really need. I stood near the window while I opened it and tried to slow my breathing. I considered calling the police. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency number. I didn't feel like I could justify tying up emergency lines over something that hadn't resulted in contact. The dispatcher answered, and I explained what happened. She asked for the make, model, and license plate. I couldn't see the plate, I said. It was dark, and it happened fast. She asked for the exact location. I gave her the mile marker as best as I could remember. "We've had some reports of erratic driving in that area," she said. "I'll log it." That was it. No units dispatched while I was on the line. No instruction to wait. I drove the rest of the way home without seeing the SUV again. When I parked in my driveway, I sat in the car longer than usual before going inside. The next night I worked, I took the freeway home. I still use that rural road sometimes, but I leave more space than I used to. And I don't try to pass if something feels off. The image that replays isn't the brake lights. It's the white of the reverse lights turning on in the middle of an empty road, and the vehicle coming toward me instead of away. I cover distribution accounts across North Carolina and parts of Virginia, so I spend more nights on I-95 than I do in my own neighborhood. Long stretches don't bother me. I keep my lane, keep my distance, and avoid unnecessary passes. After a while, highway driving becomes procedural. Mirrors, speed, space. Repeat. In April of 2021, I was heading north past Fayetteville after a late warehouse drop. It was just after 10 p.m. Traffic was light, but steady enough that you weren't alone on the road. Mostly semis and a few passenger cars spaced out every couple hundred yards. I was in the right lane, doing about 5 over the limit, keeping pace with the flow. A few minutes ahead, I noticed 2 cars traveling side by side. One in the left lane, one in the right. Neither was overtaking the other. They were holding the same speed, slightly under the posted limit. That happens sometimes when someone doesn't want to speed up or slow down. I eased off the gas and let the gap close gradually. As I got closer, I saw they were older sedans. Nothing distinctive about them. No company logos, no visible damage. They continued side by side, matching speed exactly. I waited a moment to see if one would adjust. Neither did. A semi was far behind me, but gaining slowly. I didn't want to slow too much and get boxed from behind by heavier traffic. I signaled left, planning to pass the left lane car. As I began to accelerate, the left car accelerated too. Not dramatically, just enough to stay just ahead of my front bumper so I couldn't clear it safely. I dropped back into my lane. Both cars reduced speed again, settling back into their original slower pace. I stayed behind them for another minute, watching for brake lights, turn signals, anything that suggested an exit or a lane change. Nothing. I checked my mirrors. A third vehicle had appeared behind me. Dark SUV, closer than I would have liked. I hadn't noticed it approach. It closed the gap quickly and settled within a car length of my rear bumper. That tightened the space immediately. 2 cars ahead, side by side. One behind, closer than necessary. I tried again. I signaled left and pressed the gas. The left sedan sped up again, blocking the lane. The right sedan matched its speed perfectly. I eased off, letting my vehicle fall back, hoping they'd move on. The SUV behind me did not fall back. It crept closer. Close enough that I couldn't see its headlights in my rearview mirror without adjusting it downward. I changed lanes to the right shoulder line slightly to create space. The right sedan drifted slightly right at the same time, narrowing the lane without crossing the line. Not enough to hit the rumble strip, enough to signal control. My chest felt tight, but my hands stayed steady on the wheel. The front left sedan's hazard lights blinked once. Just once. Then off. It wasn't the kind of blinking you do for a breakdown. It looked like a signal. The SUV behind me moved closer again, reducing the space to maybe half a car length. If I braked suddenly, we'd collide. If I accelerated, the two in front would match it. The speed had dropped to around 30 miles per hour now, on an interstate. No exit ramp nearby, guardrail on the right, grass median on the left, separated by cable barriers. I considered laying on the horn, but that would only announce panic. I checked the right shoulder ahead. There was a narrow stretch where the guardrail dipped slightly, and the shoulder widened for maybe 50 yards. Not much, but more than I had. I signaled right without waiting for permission. The right sedan didn't move immediately. I steered toward the shoulder anyway. My right tires hit the rumble strip, vibrating hard through the steering column. The right sedan edged closer, but not enough to physically block the shoulder. I committed. I dropped a gear and pressed the accelerator hard. My vehicle lurched forward onto the shoulder fully. Gravel and dust kicked up against the passenger side. The guardrail ran close enough that I could see the reflection of my headlights flicker along it. For a moment, the SUV behind me followed into the shoulder, but it hesitated when the space narrowed near the guardrail. I pushed forward, holding the line even as the shoulder sloped unevenly. There was a scraping sound along the passenger side as I misjudged the clearance by inches. Metal on metal. But I didn't slow. I cleared the two sedans by accelerating along the shoulder and then signaled left back into the lane ahead of them. I didn't look directly at them as I merged. I just focused on getting distance. I accelerated to well above the speed limit for several seconds before easing back down once I saw more vehicles ahead in the distance. In my rearview mirror, the two sedans had reformed side by side briefly. Then they separated. The SUV behind slowed and dropped back. Within less than a mile, all three vehicles exited at the same ramp. Together. I kept going. My hands didn't shake, but my forearms felt tight for the next 10 minutes. I didn't stop at the first exit. I waited until I reached a large, brightly lit truck stop, with multiple semis parked and people moving around. I pulled in near the entrance doors and left the engine running for a minute before stepping out. The scrape along my passenger side was visible under the lights. Paint scuffed, minor dent near the rear door. Cosmetic damage, mostly. Inside the truck stop, I bought a coffee I didn't need and stood near the front windows, scanning the parking lot. No sign of the three vehicles. I considered calling Highway Patrol. I had no plates, no clear identifying features. Just three cars in coordinated movement. The next morning, I searched online for cars blocking highway at night. I found articles about rolling roadblock robberies, groups of vehicles boxing in a target to force a stop, then surrounding it. Some reports were in other states, a few in the southeast. None listed Fayetteville specifically, at least not that week. I don't know if that's what I ran into. I only know that three separate drivers made the same decisions at the same time. Now, when I see two cars traveling side by side at night for longer than makes sense, I create space early, and I don't wait to see how long they can hold formation. I'm a social worker. Most of my cases involve kids who don't have a stable place to sleep. I've pulled over on highways before because someone left a toddler on a curb during an argument. I've knocked on doors at midnight because a neighbor heard screaming. My default setting, professionally and personally, is to check first and assume someone needs help. In September of 2022, I left a late placement meeting just outside Bakersfield. It had gone longer than planned. A foster family backed out at the last minute, and we were rearranging options in real time. By the time I got in my car, it was around 1:30 a.m. The drive home took me along a rural stretch that cut between farmland and patches of dry, uneven ground. No houses close to the road. No streetlights except near intersections. I had the radio off. After nights like that, I prefer quiet. My headlights stretched ahead in a narrow cone, catching fence posts and the occasional reflective sign. About 20 minutes into the drive, I saw something in the road ahead. At first, it looked like a shadow slightly taller than a mailbox post. I slowed instinctively, easing my foot off the gas. As I got closer, the shape resolved into what looked like a small child standing in the center of the lane. Short, thin arms at their sides, facing my direction but not moving. My first reaction wasn't fear. It was confusion. There were no houses nearby, no parked cars on the shoulder, no obvious reason for a child to be standing alone on that stretch of road at that hour. I pressed the brake gently and slowed to a crawl. My mind went through possibilities automatically. Sleepwalking, a kid wandering away from a farmhouse, someone who had been dropped off. I flicked my high beams on for a clearer look. The figure didn't react. It didn't shield its eyes. It didn't step back. It just stood there. I checked my mirrors. No headlights behind me. The road was empty. I considered stopping fully and putting my hazards on. That's what I would normally do in my line of work. You don't leave a child in the road. As my car rolled closer, maybe 40 feet away now, I noticed something that felt wrong. The figure wasn't shifting its weight. Even a scared or frozen child moves a little. They sway. They adjust their stance. This shape stayed fixed. My headlights hit it directly. The face was hard to make out. The proportions were slightly off. Not dramatically, but enough that my brain stalled. At that moment, movement caught my eye to the right. There was a dirt turnout that led into what looked like an unpaved service road or access path. From that darkness, a vehicle rolled forward. A van. No headlights. It moved slowly at first, just enough that I could see the outline separate from the background. My stomach didn't drop. It tightened in a practical way, like when you realize you misjudged a step on a ladder. The van angled toward the road. My car was still slowing. The figure in the road didn't move. I had maybe 2 seconds to decide whether I was about to help a child or drive into something I didn't understand. I pressed the gas instead of the brake, not hard at first, just enough to commit to forward motion. The van's headlights snapped on suddenly. It accelerated, not fast enough to T-bone me at that point, but fast enough that its intent felt clear. The figure in the road remained where it was. I steered slightly left within my lane, aiming to pass the figure without hitting it. As I did, I saw that the child didn't have the natural posture of someone standing on their own. It was rigid, too rigid. I drove past it without stopping. In my side mirror, I saw the van pull fully onto the road behind me. Its headlights were on now, bright and direct. It closed distance quickly. I didn't look at my speedometer. I focused on keeping the car steady and straight. The road ahead was still empty. No cross traffic, no houses, just dark land and the faint suggestion of fence lines. The van stayed behind me at a distance that felt intentional, not tailgating, not falling back, holding. I checked my phone mounted on the dash. Signal was weak but present. I considered calling 911, but I also knew I'd need to explain what I was reporting. A van followed me after I didn't stop for something in the road, sounded thin without context. Up ahead, there was a small agricultural supply store that kept its parking lot lights on overnight. It wasn't open, but the lot was illuminated. I headed for it. The van remained behind me as I signaled and turned into the lot. As soon as I made the turn, the van slowed. It didn't follow into the lot. It continued straight down the road, headlights steady. I pulled into the brightest area of the lot and stopped. My hands were steady on the wheel, but I noticed my breathing was shallow. I looked back toward the road. The van's taillights were already small in the distance. I stayed in the car for several minutes, engine running. The lot was empty. No other vehicles, no movement. After a few minutes, I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I described the location, the figure in the road, the van emerging from the dirt turnout. The dispatcher listened without interrupting. "Was the child moving?" she asked. "No," I said. "It didn't react at all." "Did you see a plate?" "No." She paused. "We've had some reports in rural areas about objects being placed in roads," she said carefully. "We'll send a unit to check." "Objects?" I repeated. "Sometimes mannequins," she said. "Sometimes decoys." I didn't respond right away. "Are you safe now?" she asked. "Yes," I said. I waited in the lit lot until I saw headlights approach from the direction I'd come. A patrol vehicle passed the entrance without turning in. I assumed they were heading toward the spot. I didn't drive back to see what they found. I took a longer route home, sticking to better lit roads. The next morning, I checked local social media groups and news feeds. Nothing posted. No missing child alerts, no road hazard warnings. Later that week, a colleague mentioned hearing about cases in other counties where people used child-sized mannequins or bundled clothing to get drivers to stop. I didn't confirm whether that's what I saw. All I know is that my first instinct was to stop, and the van was waiting for that decision. If your late-night drives only involve bad radio stations and empty coffee cups, you're lucky. Smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare, and tell us which driver you think handled it best. But if you think being inside four walls is safer than an empty road, think again. Click now to watch 4 disturbing first day on the job horror stories, because not every threat follows you. Some are already inside. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.